From watching war videos and seeing pictures, I had a clear idea of what the Vietnam War was like. Daily combat with enemy troops, arms being fired, and soldiers dying every few seconds during those combat times. And enjoyment in clubs and bars with girls after a long day of fighting. I thought that when I was finished with my interview, my grandma's brother or my great uncle Steve would tell me all about this idea I had of the Vietnam War. The war was a traumatic experience for Steve and put a hole in his life for 2 years, when he could have been working or married to his girlfriend at the time, now wife Carol. However, it was not to the extent I was thinking, and his war story was nothing like the classic war videos show. Steve was born April 22, 1946. He went off to fight in the war 4th of July 1969 and returned home 4th of July 1970. Before fighting in the war, he had a year of training in various states. After that, and before going to fight in the war, he married Carol. As you may recall, the United States took over fighting Vietnam for France so that Ho Chi Minh, the founder of the Communist Party and later the president of North Vietnam, and his Communist Party wouldn't spread communism to other parts of the world. The United States thought it was helping South Vietnam by fighting with them, so the United States drafted men the right ages and later used a lottery system so that there would be troops in Vietnam to help the efforts.
Well, I was essentially drafted, so I didn't really have a choice.
As mentioned earlier, the Vietnam War in my mind was entirely different from Steve's experiences. For starters, Steve barely fought. Instead, he was in a special program called Unintended Ground Sensor Warfare. What does that mean?
Well, it was super secret stuff through military intelligence, and did we had seismic, infrared, magnetic, and acoustic devices that were real small. We put them out on enemy infiltration routes from North Vietnam into South Vietnam.
Wow.
And then if we had movement along the trails, we called in jet strikes and ranger patrols and things like that. We'd insert them into the area.
Unattended ground sensor warfare was first used in the Vietnam War to detect enemy movement. The sensors mentioned were used to identify target, format this info into a digital message, and send that message to the operational status. The sensor data could also be used to determine number of targets, target direction, speed, and location. The sensors could be unattended up to 30 days and worked in any weather, both day and night. I had no idea that Steve was in the war as a spy in a way, tracking enemy movements with special devices and sending weapons, such as jet strikes, into the area to kill the enemy. I didn't realize that the Vietnam War barely had any face-to-face combat. I knew from learning about different strategies in the war, such as guerrilla warfare, that there was a lot less combat, face-to-face combat like in many wars, but the way Steve fought in the war was really unexpected and new to me. He did have some run-ins with the Viet Cong enemy troops, though, but his main goal was to stay away from them. Steve did have some vague stories of run-ins with the Viet Cong forces.
So the only scary times were if we spotted them, and we had to, hunker down for 3, 4, 5 hours at a time just to stay away. Yeah, oh yeah. I had NVA go through our area where we counted up to 250 people.
Oh wow, what was that like?
I was scared.
Was there anything you could do, or could you?
No, you just didn't want to be seen.
Yeah, so you just had to hide.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the U.S. government and the South Vietnamese government got exactly what they deserve.
Why do you think that?
Well, I'm thinking how many presidents lied to the American public, all the way from Richard Nixon to Lyndon Johnson. They all lied to us. They told us, the war was winnable and it was the right thing to do. and it wasn't the right thing to do.
So did you believe at the time it was the right thing to do because they told you?
What? No, say that again.
Did you believe it was the right thing to do because they told you?
Yeah.
And then when you found out?
Yeah, there were thousands of Americans that were killed that didn't need to die.
Yeah.
Steve couldn't do anything in these instances, but sometimes he could capture the Viet Cong, and this is what he would have to do. Steve and thousands of other Americans now at this day and age, and even then, see that the war was pointless and unwinnable. Yet thousands of Americans and Vietnamese soldiers died because the presidents at the time made it seem that the war was necessary for the future of the world. Riots in San Francisco and all over the country made headlines in order to protest against the government, saying that the war was unnecessary. Yet the war dragged on for several years.
One time I was flying from one fire base to the next, and when we landed at a fire base, it was getting shelled by artillery by the NVA.
Oh, wow.
And 2 guys got wounded, and the helicopter made it. We landed in a Vietnamese hamlet called Tam Key, and had to get help to come in and get us out of there.
Like from the southern Vietnamese people, or like, do you know who helped you?
Another American group came in and picked us up.
What is it? Like, what do you mean you landed? Like, did you land in, like...
Well, the helicopter was losing oil. And it was going to go down, and so he found a hamlet we could get down to and then get protection around the helicopter, and then another group came in and picked us up and got us out of there.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. Then I have another friend, Terry Fairchild, who was going out to change some batteries, and he had been in country for maybe 4 or 5 months, and he got hit by a booby trap.
Oh, wow.
And wrecked his leg and part of his arm, and so he was medevaced back to the rear area and then to Japan. And next time I saw him, he was at Letterman Army Hospital in San Francisco, and by that time we'd moved down there, and so we saw he and his new wife down there. In fact, they lived a block and a half from us, so we saw them a lot socially.
I had no idea that Steve was flying around in helicopters, traveling around Vietnam, staying in different bunkers, and tracking Viet Cong forces in order to bring in airstrikes. Skipping forward to the end of Steve's war experience, he moved back to Medford for 2 weeks and then moved to San Francisco in order to live in a big city where everything was new. His wife Carol moved with him, and they lived down the street from an army hospital, the same one that his friend was at that was mentioned in the last video.
Some NVA, Viet Cong, and take them back to a fire base.
Oh, wow. What would you do there?
Well, I was stationed on different fire bases in Vietnam. Fire base consisted of a battalion, which was about 4 companies, and they had artillery base up there and things like that. So that was a central location for bringing in prisoners to
I asked him how he felt about the outcome of the war, and his responses were very interesting and intriguing.
Base.
Oh, wow.
This part really shocked me. Steve didn't want to see the enemy. His whole task among tracking the Viet Cong forces was to stay away from them, yet sometimes he would have to incarcerate them. When I asked him how he felt about that, he said he didn't feel bad at all, because if his troops hadn't captured the enemies, he and his troop could be in lots of danger. It's frightening just thinking about it, so I can't imagine how this internal struggle must feel at that point in time. Over the course of the year, Steve spent endless, tired nights taking shifts as guard at the bunkers he stayed at, ate the food he described as gross — it was endless instant meals and frozen food you would find camping — and worked on the job he had as a part of the Vietnam War. Steve said he never got to have any fun, and since he wasn't ever in the city, he never got to go to clubs or parties like some war videos show veterans enjoying. Steve even included that overall, his war experience was boring because he was doing the same thing day after day. There were a few instances that stood out to him that occurred to his friends or himself, but all in all, the war was a long, giant blur.
I would say I became very cynical of government.
Mm-hmm. So, like, when you say really cynical of government, how does that, like,
I don't trust them.
you don't trust them still to this day?
I don't have a lot of trust in government,
Even to this day?
even to this day.
Because of this war, and that was my great uncle Steve's experience fighting and working in the Vietnam War. Thanks for watching.